Give us this day our daily bread.
Behold the Lamb of God. Behold him who takes away the sins of the world.
Drew, what you doing?
In the first session, we talked about why dealing with anger is such an important thing to God. And we talked about starting to name the anger in our life and starting to look at all the causes of anger in our life so that we really can make that journey to gentleness that God calls us to all through our life. In this second session, what we want to do is we want to talk about some distinctions about anger. And then after the distinction, some types of anger, especially hot and cold anger, because most people don't talk about that distinction. And it's an extremely important one when we deal with anger. One of the things that I mentioned about God's desire for us to deal with our anger is the dream he has for us. And the reason he feels so strongly about this dream is that God, more than anyone in the world, recognizes how vulnerable human beings are, no matter what age. You know, a lot of times when we grow up, as an adult, we think the little kid that lived years ago is gone. But that little kid still lives inside of us. And in every one of us, from the toughest construction worker to the most mature professional mom, there's still a little boy lives in that construction worker. There's still a little girl lives in this very professional woman in the world who comes home and then is a very nurturing mom. That little kid in us still gets very hurt often. And God recognizes that vulnerability. And so often, whether it's in marriages, whether it's in the workplace, whether it's among friends, we forget how vulnerable people are and how much damage anger can do. It's one reason that Jesus said what he said about, you know, I'm not just worried about people who kill other people. I don't want you to be angry, because he knew that killing the body is one thing, but killing the spirit is also very important. And spouses can kill the spirit in each other if there's too much anger in the marriage. Parents can kill the spirit in children if there's too much harshness, too much anger, too much criticism. Because discipline is important, but anger is not the same as discipline. And sometimes when we get very angry and critical of our kids, especially if it's an ongoing criticism, that's not discipline. That kills their spirit. And that's what Jesus worries about. He even tells us at one point, he says, I feel so strongly about this that if you're coming to the temple or the synagogue with your gift, and you're going to bring your gift to the altar, but you realize that your brother or sister has anything against you, that you've offended them, let your gift there, let it at the and go first and get reconciled to your brother or your sister. Then come back and offer a gift to God. But don't come to God until you've reconciled with your brother and sister. It's that important to God. It's that important to Jesus as the Son of God. When we look at anger, the one question we have to ask ourselves is we have to say, what is my default reaction? You know, we're all used to the default things in our computers. Well, we have default angers that are built into us, default reactions, where that's our default reaction or response. What we're trying to do in these reflections is say, has anger become a habit? Because anger can be just as addictive as anything else. Anger can become a habit, and we don't want it to become a habit. So what we're really reflecting on, whether we're looking at causes or distinctions about anger or types of anger, we're trying to say, as we try to grow into a people of a gentle spirit, what's our habit? Do we need to check an addiction that we have to anger? Can we catch ourselves in those reactions, be aware of it enough that we end up choosing a different response? That's the journey that God is inviting us to make. So if we begin this healing process, what we begin is with a self-awareness. How much is anger part of my life? And for some people, they'd say, no, I think it's okay. You know, I blow up once in a while or I get aggravated, but I don't think it's my default reaction. I don't think I've gotten into this habit of anger. I don't think it's a problem. Other people would say, no, this is something that is robbing me of happiness, and it's robbing all the people around me of happiness. So the first is awareness. The second is honesty. Whenever we pray, we need to pray often for courage and honesty. When we examine our life, and you've heard me say other times, I don't like to use the word examination of conscience because that takes us back to being a little kid and trying to do it in 10 or 15 minutes. That doesn't do much for us. Examining our life means an honesty and awareness that takes a while. That's why a lot of people do this during Lent, that they take the gift of Lent, which is 6 weeks, to just say, let me just examine my life. Let me look at areas of my life where I'm not as happy as I want to be, where the joy that is the infallible sign of the presence of God is absent, where I'm not living up to the dream I want to do. So that's where we start, is awareness, honesty, examining our life, and realizing the harm that anger does. Because sometimes we don't realize how it's affecting spouses, kids, co-workers, until someone calls us on it and we name it. All right, let's start at the beginning. We've spoken other times about the three journeys that God calls us to in the spiritual life. Learning to love ourselves, learning to love others, learning to love God, and that these are lifelong journeys that constantly are needing our attention. Let's start with anger itself. It's related to learning to love ourselves, but it's looking at it from a little bit different perspective. Many people, if they really try to be self-aware and try to be honest, realize that a lot of their anger is at themselves. They've been carrying an anger inside of themselves a long time. And part of this comes from something the psychologist teaches. They tell us that whatever our parents did for us over the first 13, 14 years of our life, at about 14 years of age, we pick that up and we start doing it ourselves, only we do it in spades. So if our parents took really good care of us, we probably will too. If our parents were very affirming, we probably will be too. If our parents were very proud of us and admired us a lot, we will admire ourselves in a very quiet sense without arrogance or pride, and we'll carry that on. But if the negative has happened, if we grew up in a household or with a teacher that was very critical, at 14 years old or around there, we start picking that up and we become very, very critical of ourselves. Many people, when you push them on it, and many times in the sacrament of reconciliation, when as a soul friend to people, I try, like the old Irish monks, the Anam Cara, the soul friend, when we try to look at what's behind this anger, and we get to some anger itself, we'll find people really saying, you know, I've been critical of myself all my life. If I criticized anybody else as much as I criticize me, I would consider it really sinful. But I don't seem to have any problem with it if I'm criticizing me. Sometimes we can be very harsh with ourselves. So many people beat themselves up. Teenagers are really good at this. I talk to the teens about this a lot. Teenagers are so hard on themselves. You know, why did I say that? Why did I do that? That was stupid. Why am I so selfish? Why did I hurt people, my mom and dad, like I did? Teenagers can be so tough on themselves. But some people never outgrow that. Some people holler at themselves. I tease some moms sometimes when they say, oh, I'm so impatient with my kids. And I'll say to them, when you holler at your kids at 8 o'clock in the evening, when you go to bed at 10:30, do you holler at you for hollering at them? Yeah. Say, well, we've got to start there. We've got to start there. Until you learn to be a little more gentle with you and not so harsh with you, you're always going to holler at your kids. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes, that it's the pot boiling over. One of the other ways that we can be very angry at ourselves is making demands on ourselves that we would never make of other people. Some of the things we demand of ourselves, especially as adults, when we demand, that we be the best mom and the best dad, and that we work so hard and we put up with this kind of stuff at work, and we're involved in this, and we're taking the kids here, and we're doing this, and we're doing that. If we asked anybody else to do as much as we ask of ourselves, we would probably think it was sinful and cruel. But we don't have any problem doing it to ourselves. But then when we do, because of that pace we put ourselves through and these demands, we end up getting very angry at ourselves. And God says, don't do that. Don't do that. Let me help you unplug that anger. The most important reason for anger itself is an inability to forgive oneself. I can't tell you how many people I've worked with who've done something 20 years ago, 30 years ago, whatever it might be. They clowned around in college and didn't study and flunked out and never got their degree, and they have been angry at themselves ever since, and they're 50 years old. But they've never been able to forgive that the 19-year-old was a clown. Well, a lot of 19-year-olds are clowns, but they can't get past it. The person who had an abortion 30 years ago, and we speak so strongly against abortion, and thank goodness we do, but we also speak just as strongly about forgiveness and the mercy of God and our ability to forgive ourselves. So many of us have done something 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 40 years ago, when we were 15 years old, whatever, and are still carrying that around because we've never forgiven ourselves. One of the things that we've talked about in some of these other reflections is the difference between forgiving oneself and excusing. A lot of people say, yeah, but if I forgive it, isn't it like I'm just making an excuse for why it happened? Now, forgiveness and excusing are two totally different things. Excusing says I didn't do anything wrong. Forgiveness is saying, yes, I did something wrong, and I'm going to admit it to myself, and I'm accountable for it. But I'm going to have enough compassion for myself to be able to forgive it. And that's part of the problem. Most of us have never learned compassion. The reason God finds no problem forgiving us is God has such a compassion for the sadness in our lives. Every one of us, no matter who we are, every one of us has gone through things when we were 4 years old, and when we were in second grade, and when we were in fifth grade, and things that were said to us in eighth grade, and people that rejected us as a junior in high school, and stuff that's happened throughout our life. All of us, every person, if we get in touch with our own story, knows there's been so much loneliness, so many misunderstandings, so many judgments, so many hurts. And God says, I see all that. It doesn't mean I excuse what you did. It doesn't mean I call it right. It's just, I put it in the bigger picture, and I understand your weakness, and I'm able to forgive it, and I'm able to say, I remove it as far as the east is from the west. When I look at it, I can't see you, and when I look at you, I can't see it. It's never again in the same picture. And the reason I do that and tell you that is I want you to be able to do that. Forgive some of that stuff from the past. Let it in the past. Let go of it and go on. But the reason we can't do that is we've never learned the art of compassion because we mix it up with self-pity. Self-pity is what a little immature person does. An immature person feels self-pity. Woe is me. I got gypped. Nothing's right in my life. That's immature. And when they come and tell me that stuff, all they do is tell me the whole story. Here's what happened to me. Here's all the stuff that got dumped on top of me. And they've got this story recited word for word because they've told 14 other people the same story. The story doesn't make the difference. What they can't do is feel the feelings behind the story. That's compassion. Compassion is when I can sit as a mature adult and listen to the pain and the sadness that has gone on in my life. And I can move from being angry at me for not being my best self all the time to marveling that with what I've been through in my life, the good side of me is around it all. I could just be a mean, selfish, rotten, no good, whatever. But I'm not. God asks us to make that journey, to forgive the stuff in the past. Yes, I wasn't always my best self. I sinned. I was wrong. I accept it. But in compassion, I can understand it and forgive it. I've said so often, if someone told you your story, but it was someone else telling you that story, and you listened to them over coffee or over a beer, you wouldn't feel pity for them, but you'd feel a real sadness for what they've been through. But it's really your story. We can feel that sadness when it's in someone else, but we can't feel the sadness when it's in ourselves. That compassion for ourselves, that's what allows us to forgive. That's what gets us there. Now let me go back to this thing I talked about, the pot boiling over. Why this is so important is every one of us knows with common sense, if you got a pot boiling over on the stove, you don't run and get 2 cups and try to catch all the water and pour it back in the pot. First of all, you're never going to catch all the water. And secondly, it's going to be an unending process because it's going to keep boiling over. All of us know with good common sense, you turn down the heat or get the pot off the stove. The same is true with anger, harshness, impatience. If I'm angry at me, if I've got this pot boiling under me, if there's too much heat under me, and I'm angry at myself, that pot boils over onto husbands and wives and kids and neighbors and coworkers. The answer is not go get 2 cups to pour all the impatience back in or all the harshness back in. It doesn't work in the kitchen, and it doesn't work in our spiritual life. Get the heat out from under the pot. Let me teach you a short prayer. Say it every day of your life. God, teach me to be as gentle with me as you are with me. We don't want to be holier than God. God, teach me to be as gentle with me as you are with me. I promise you, if you do that, a year from now, you're going to be a lot more patient with everybody else. I know what I'm talking about. I'm that angry gentleman. God is making a dent year by year. Thank you.